I'm not quite sure how to do this video, but I think it's one that needs to get done. And the genesis of this is one of the services I provide for one of my dealers is to evaluate potential trade-ins, right? And sometimes they come through and they're what they're supposed to be, what people say they are, and sometimes they come through like this. And I think the subject of the video should be, how do I know if I'm being scammed? Okay? So this was presented as a 372. And the people who looked at it go, I take a look, Walt, I'm not sure. Well, it says Husqvarna 372. It even says X-Torq right there. And I would submit to you that the parts of this saw that are X-Torq are confined to that sticker. Pull start handle, possibly that. This handle right here, and this. That's not an X-Torq, is it? So there's your first clue that things aren't quite the way you'd expect them to be. This isn't so bad. I mean, this is a side cover, but there are no markings on it. So it's pretty obvious this is aftermarket. Nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of OEM saws that have aftermarket side covers. That's pretty much the norm because a lot of them get broke. But that's obviously not X-Torq because the X-Torq has the decomp on the top, not the side. There's your first flag. Second flag. If you look very closely right there, I'll bring the camera in. For those people who have followed my channel, do you remember when the last time you saw one of those like that? Oh, I'm not seeing any markings on that cylinder, so maybe we should look a little further. And to add sort of insult to injury, look at this. He's got an 8-pin sprocket on this real hot rod right here. It's probably a big bore, right? That's obviously not Husqvarna. So what you're looking at is a set of aftermarket cases, Chinese. There's no tag, and that can happen for one of two reasons. One, the aftermarket cases like these, or two, it was a saw that was a warranty, and sometimes the dealers took in those saws that had bottom end problems. They pull that tag, and the agreement they had with Husqvarna is if they pull the tag off the cases, they destroy the saw. Now I've seen a fair number of those that, well, they didn't get destroyed. But this case is not Husqvarna at all. It's aftermarket, and the way you can tell is that bar oil slot is a little bit off what OEM should be. And if we were to split the cases, you'd see some other differences. You know, it would be more like a 371 set of cases versus a 372. And if you look in there, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, the light's in there, but the stiffening rib that's supposed to go all the way across on the 372 cases, it only is on the flywheel side on the aftermarket cases, and there is no stiffening rib on the top of that oil tank on the PTO half of the case, which is also consistent with aftermarket cases, but also that gasket, that green gasket, that's consistent with an aftermarket set of gaskets. So let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about. OEM 372 cases from an X-Torq would have this stiffening ribbon here. And you can see that by looking in the oil tank hole, the bar oil tank hole, like I just showed you. And that set of cases does not have that stiffening rib, further indicating that it's not a 372 X-Torq set of cases. Well, I know it's not, but I'm just showing you other things that you can look at to sort of hammer that point home. So what we have here is, came off an X-Torq, probably a blown up X-Torq that they didn't figure had any more value, whoever put this saw together. And they mixed in $100 short block, probably from Hudslow or someone like that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a big bore, although some of those were actually 50 millimeter and some of them were actually 48s. We don't know which this one is. And they wrapped as much of the X-Torq as they could around those aftermarket cases and top end, basically the short block. So you can probably assume the clutch, cover, chain brake parts. That handle is definitely X-Torq. You can tell because it's got that little kink right there. X-Torq, X-Torq, X-Torq. But cases, top end are definitely aftermarket. Is that a bad thing? It's only a bad thing if a person tries to sell you that as if it's an OEM Husqvarna 372, which is what was happening here. So I would consider that a scam. But if a person was up front and saying, look, I built this Chicom blend between OEM parts and Chicom parts and sold it to you that way and price it appropriately, that's not a bad deal. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not always a scam because it has aftermarket parts. The person trying to describe the saw for sale has to be upfront and honest about what it is they've done. I don't really have a problem with the aftermarket cases. I've had some decent luck with those. For that matter, I think that's a legitimate way of salvaging some of the X-Torqs that the cases were just whooped on. So that's not a problem in and of itself. I don't know if it has the OEM crank. If it has the OEM crank in the aftermarket cases, I actually think that's a legitimate option. That's not a bad option at all. And the big bore aftermarket top end, they're hit and miss. So I guess the bottom line to me is this. If a person says, I'm selling to you a Husqvarna 372 X-Torq, and you got this, then that person trying to sell you that saw was being dishonest. If a person's trying to sell you this as if it's an aftermarket short block with Husqvarna plastic, and it's priced accordingly, well then everybody's up and up with it, and hey, it'll cut wood. It can be a legitimate build, so it's not a scam. That's just being straight up and honest and telling you what's there. So just as long as the person's upfront and honest with what they've got in the saw, it's not necessarily a scam. But I thought they had a hot rod here. 52 millimeter, big bore. Supposed to make more horsepower. Get rid of that. It's got an aftermarket crank in there too. Changed out this ignition too, so